Hello and welcome to the Headline Interview. I'm Luke Blackall and my guest today is Simon Pitkeathley. After a political career working on 3 Labour general election victories, he moved to his current role as Chief Executive of both Camden Town and Euston Town's business improvement districts. Lots to talk about today, Simon, but I want to start off with you and your upbringing. Where did you grow up and how was your upbringing?
It was relatively run-of-the-mill. I was born in Manchester. I grew up in Reading. I went to a local comprehensive school there. I didn't go to university. I started life trying to be a musician. Was so successful I ended up running business improvement districts, but yeah, that's a quick snapshot.
No university. I mean, lots of people will look at that and see, someone in a position of success with a big, long career behind you. Do you think you missed out, or?
I think nowadays it would be more unusual. I think then it felt more like a choice. Yeah, I had something I really wanted to do. I wanted to move to London. I wanted to get involved in the music business, and I didn't see how university was going to help me do that. So,
What would you say now to young people coming through? Do you say it's essential?
Well, no, I'd say now things are different, actually, again, because, of course, interestingly, I've got 2 children, one of whom went to university and another didn't, and they're either side of the 9 grand. So, again, I think, certainly the one who didn't go to university made a very conscious choice that he could educate himself more comprehensively outside that system. But the other's done very well through going to university as well, so it's, horses for courses.
You can see the best of both there. As I say, I touched in the intro on your political career. Tell me how you got working with the Labour Party and having a very interesting and pivotal role in the party.
Well, it's very kind of you to call it pivotal. But, well, it was an interesting coming together of 2 things, really. I was very interested in politics and events, and I'd actually worked on a thing called the Sheffield Rally, which is something that probably existed before you were born, but it was a big event because of my sort of business stuff, and they were looking for someone who could help run a media centre, but also exploit it for commercial purposes because they couldn't afford to run it, and there weren't many people with sort of Labour Party credentials who also had the business stuff, and so that was my lucky opportunity, if you like.
That was at a time when Labour was seen to be closer to business.
Indeed.
Do you feel that they've veered off that course slightly?
Well, I think Sadiq Khan's promised to be the most business-friendly mayor that London's ever had. But I know what you mean. There are other bits of the Labour Party that do feel that they've drifted away from that. But fundamentally, whoever's in power, business is hugely important to making the economy work in order that you can afford to do the other things that you need to do with public money. So I think business will always be central to most administrations' thinking.
You were there when they won 3 general election victories. Why do you think they won, and why do you think they couldn't win the last 2?
Well, I think the polling's told us that, actually, hasn't it? Ultimately it comes down to leadership in the economy, and if you track those through the various opinion polls, you can predict the outcomes as they turned out. And I think in those elections from 97, 2001, 2005. The party demonstrated both leadership and its ability or apparent ability to run the economy, and that fell away, and you saw the result. So why business is so important.
Or if they called you up, Simon, and said, "We've got the small matter of a general election, on the horizon," would you be willing to go and give them some advice?
Always willing to serve the party.
Good to hear. Now, how did you then go from working in politics to where you are now today?
I think, again, it was that sort of connection between business and politics. So business improvement districts are these strange entities. They've only been around for about 10 years. Most people have never heard of them. They involve democracy because businesses have to elect themselves into bid status. So you've got to go through all the processes of running an election. You have to be able to interpret business needs to local and regional politicians. So working with the local council, working with the GLA, Mayor of London, they're very important things. So I think it's easy to look back and say it was a natural progression, but actually I think that was a key part of it, being able to both understand what business owners and leaders knew and needed, because I'd run my own businesses, I've grew a business and sold it, but also understanding the political environment in which they had to operate.
I mean, and you touched on there. A lot of people don't know business improvement districts. What do you do, and why does Camden Town and Euston Town need you to be doing your job you're doing?
No, it's a good question. I mean, I think the business improvement districts exist because a local business community feel that there is something that needs doing, and they are prepared to put some of their own money into a legal entity that they think will deliver this thing. Now, of course, that can be a very different thing according to the environment. If in a private industrial estate they want to re-tarmac the road, a business improvement district is quite a good way of spreading the cost of that fairly across all the businesses in an area. In Camden Town, when we first started the bid there 10 years ago, it was about wanting to try and deal with the on-street drug dealing problem that was much more prolific then than it is now. In Euston, I think the big catalyst has been about what HS2 is going to both do to the area and what the opportunities are around that. So there's generally some catalyst that makes the business community think, you know what, we need a bit more help with this.
And it's the businesses that pay your salary, is that right?
Absolutely. It's entirely run by and for the business community. That doesn't mean that some of the stuff that you do doesn't benefit the local community. It's a sort of form of enlightened self-interest, if you like. But ultimately, it has to be about the people who pay that levy.
Tell me about Camden. You touched upon the drug issue there. You know, if you went a few years ago, you were very likely to step out of Camden Town Tube Station and be offered drugs.
Yeah.
That seems to have gone away. That was a big desire from the local businesses, was it?
Absolutely. I think, you know, there was a time, you know, back then, the time you refer to, you know, would often be the only, you know, middle-aged man wearing a suit in the high street and still be offered drugs at midday. You know, it was chronic. And I think we felt that the authorities had lost sight of the problem. So what the BID did was hire private security to patrol the streets. And it wasn't that we wanted to privatise that function in any way, shape or form. We just wanted to get some attention on the issue. And to their credit, both the Met Police and the local authority recognised that as a result of this attention and stepped up and have funded a wonderful local tasking team of officers that's really focused on the problem. And as you say, you know, it's not nearly the problem it used to be.
It's an interesting thing. You mentioned the private security thing, because that has come up as a sort of bit of a hot potato recently. Residents in Hampstead wanting to fund their own police force. I know already certain businesses pay. The deal is you can, of course, pay for your own officers. What do you see as the future for that, and is that something that's going to grow?
I think it's going to be peculiar to each area. I'm personally not a huge fan. I think that we already pay a lot of taxes to provide things like the police force, and I think businesses putting their hands into their pockets again to do that isn't necessarily the right solution, although there might be certain circumstances where you could see that it does make a lot of sense. I'd much rather organisations like mine use what resource we've got, which isn't a huge amount, to come up with a vision, articulate that, prime it when necessary, and then try and build a coalition of people, of statutory authorities who can pay for it, rather than expecting the businesses to keep putting their hands in their pockets to pay for it.
And when we talk about businesses, I think I should clarify this. What size, because business is a rather catch-all phrase, what size people are we talking about?
So in Camden Town and Euston Town, we've got a threshold of rateable value of 60 and 70k. So if your rateable value, which is another rather technical term, but if your rateable value is above that threshold and you're in the patch, then if there's been a yes vote, you're a member of the BID and you'll be paying a levy. But that doesn't, some business improvement districts don't have a threshold at all, and they would incorporate everyone. We take the view that for a lot of very small businesses, even a little additional cost is felt very keenly, and the greatest value that a business improvement district can bring is when you're being really strategic. So you are saying, look, what is the big problem for this area? How can we bring what resource we've got to bear to solve that problem? And if you're taking a small amount of money off, say, a local barber's, not that I'd be visiting the barbers myself, then they're going to want their pound of flesh. They're going to want you to sort out all the problems right outside their shop, and you get stuck with that kind of activity rather than the strategic stuff. Whereas if you keep a threshold in there, they get the benefit of the big stuff, but they're not having to pay for it.
But is there not also the risk that the smaller operations could be crowded out? They're often the people who are paying the lower rents. If things go up, they're the ones who often get squeezed out last.
You know, that's a sort of gentrification problem across I was going to say across the world. It's certainly across London. You know, how do you improve areas without ultimately benefiting the landlord who's going to get the uplift in the rent? I think that's an interesting problem, and it's an important distinction that by and large, when we're talking about business improvement districts, we're talking about occupiers, not landowners. There are a couple of exceptions, but business improvement districts levy people who occupy the premises, who have leases, not the people who own them, even though ultimately you might be improving the area for the benefit of the owner.
And but you don't have to be part of it, or do you have to be part of it if you're a bigger size firm and you say might not want to be part of it?
No, once the ballot has passed, if you had the opportunity to vote and the vote goes positive, then you have to pay.
Even if it went against your wishes?
Even if you voted no and everyone else voted yes, you'd still have to pay.
But you would argue that they'll benefit from it.
Exactly, they still get the benefit of everything that you do. But in a sense, that's democracy. You might vote Tory, I might vote Labour. We'll get, we have to live with the result. It's the kind of same deal, really.
Simon Pitkeathley, very, very interesting. I want to talk more about your work in Camden and Euston just after the break. But like I say, quick break now. We're back in just a few minutes with more from the headline interview. Welcome back to the headline interview. I'm Luke Blackwell and my guest today is Simon Pitkeathley, who's the Chief Executive of the Business Improvement Districts in both Euston and Camden Towns. Now, before that we were getting a bit more of a context for the break, Simon, about these Business Improvement Districts. What do you think their impact has been in the years they've been in operation?
Well, it's a pertinence that Euston was London's 50th Business Improvement District, so it was a kind of a moment to mark, and the Mayor of London, Boris, had stated he wanted 50 bids in his mayoral term, so we managed to just sneak in before the election. I think they've achieved an awful lot of things, but some of it is quite parochial. So if you're in Camden, you'll know that the streetscapes have improved, you'll know the drug dealers have reduced, you'll know there are things like our collective project, where we find disused space and give it, free of charge often, to local micro startup creative businesses. Pan London, I think you might struggle to see all those initiatives, but I think there is a sense in those areas where there are business improvement districts of a more coherent voice from the business community. If you're in the GLA, if you're in a regional authority like that, you're much more aware of that voice from the occupying business community. It is early days, but I think their bids are making their presence felt already. You
mentioned Boris Johnson there. He's coming to the end of his tenure at City Hall. What do you make of his leadership, and what do you think his biggest failings have been as mayor?
Well, one of his successes was the 50 business improvement districts, which he set out to do and achieved with our help. I suppose I think the things I think he's done well are around things like how the LEPers worked, the London Enterprise Panel, which is a slightly technical area, but it's a public-private partnership that brings the private sector in the decision-making around how that City Hall money is spent. I think that's actually gone quite well, despite the fact that people still don't quite understand it, and again, it's early days. His failings, well, I suppose the thing your eye is drawn to at the moment is his stance on Europe. That, to me, seems not helpful to London. On behalf of the GLA, I chair a group where we disseminate €750 million to help various enterprises across London. So the idea of that disappearing feels like a bit of a shame. So I wish he were more pro-EU.
I mean, and that's, talk about that, there's been much debate of what a Brexit could do to London, and some saying we'd actually be fine off on our own. What's your view on that?
From what I can tell, this is very difficult because there's all this different information flying around. From what I can tell personally, I do think that we'll be worse off out of the EU. I think we're so tied in, there's so many things that benefit us that we don't see on a day-to-day basis. I understand people feel overly controlled by the EU sometimes, and it's far, far from perfect, but I think on balance we'd be better off in. And, we've done polls of our members, and there is a sort of general, broadly 6-to-1 view that in is better than out, and most business people seem to feel that.
6-to-1, that's a very high.
Yeah, although,
ratio.
Some of us would think, well, who's the one? What are they seeing, Because, I think most business people understand the market opportunities. I mean, the business that I ran for a number of years and then sold, we were manufacturing table tennis tables, would you believe? And we started off doing it in China, and we ended up moving that production to Spain and Germany because it was just so much easier to get stuff into the UK from within the EU than it was from the Far East.
Well, very interesting. Now, you mentioned that Boris is coming to the end of his run. We've got 12 candidates up, all announced officially now. The next mayor who comes in, what would you like their priority to be in terms of what you do?
From my perspective, it would be about support for SMEs. My view is that there is something like an 80% failure rate of startups. It's probably true across the country, but I'm specifically talking about London. That 20% that do well, they are hard-hitting entrepreneurial types. Some of them are lucky, but mostly they're people with a real gung-ho attitude and an understanding of what it is they're trying to do. There's also the next tier down, say that sort of 5% between 80 and 75, who are really, really good, but with a little bit more help could move into the survival rather than the failure group. And I think the impact on London's economy of changing the nature, the success rate of that 5% would be huge. We don't get growth in our economy from established businesses swapping market share. It comes from growth in SMEs. So that would be the area I'd want them to focus on. So, providing space for startups like we do in Collective, I think is hugely, hugely important. I think some of the stuff that central government have done in terms of breaks for SMEs in business rates, but it's generally about getting support and help to these people. How can you find ways of giving them that little bit of support that enables them to test their business idea out before they've locked themselves into, say, long leases? I think most people who run a business will recognise that the first business plan they write is meaningless the minute they print it, and it's not until they test it in the market that they really start to understand where the opportunity is. So how can you provide opportunities for people to experiment with that stuff without getting them locked into things that are actually going to take them down the wrong path too soon?
And does education come into that? Should we be reaching out younger, but also to other perhaps communities who we don't always see businesses from?
Absolutely right. I mean, the wonderful thing about Camden Collective is it is a very diverse community. We draw from people all over Camden. It's very mixed in terms of gender. Because lots and lots of people from all sorts of backgrounds are interested in business these days. When I was young, people wanted to be footballers, train drivers, all this stuff. Now you'll hear people in primary school saying they want to go into business. They've seen The Apprentice, they've seen all that stuff. So it is a sexy topic for lots of people. But the opportunity and the support around that is quite difficult to find sometimes. It's another reason I'm a governor at an FE college, and I think that the FE colleges in London that are going through quite an interesting time. We don't have to be obsessed about traditional education. If we can provide more of that vocational opportunity and more contact with existing business owners and leaders, I think you can shift that 5% I'm talking about over the line relatively easily, but you've got to really focus on it.
All very interesting. We've spoken about Camden. I want to speak a bit more about Euston, which is your other thing. When it's the first thing people see if they're coming in from the Midlands, and certainly the area around Euston Station is not always been celebrated. There's nice bits of it, but it's it's not always the prettiest part of town. What future do you see for Euston Town and particularly with Crossrail coming in?
Well, I'm really pleased you used the term Euston Town, because that's, I think, what Euston most lacks is identity. It's a station. It's a massive, great big grey box in the middle of actually kind of 3 communities. And so I think the real opportunity there is to try and give Euston a sense of itself, so it can start to, in the way that Camden Town obviously has, but so does Fitzrovia now, so does Bloomsbury, so does King's Cross and St Pancras now. Those places have an identity in the way that Euston doesn't. So how can we give Euston an identity? How can we make the most of the opportunity that the big project HS2, Crossrail 2, hopefully the redevelopment of Euston Station as part of that will present, painful though they'll be in the short term, how can we steer those so that we can create more affordable housing, more affordable workspace, and develop a real culture in that part of London, particularly somewhere that's been so, in a way, forgotten and a bit grey, is the awful term for it, really.
So you want people to become a destination? Because at the moment, you never think of going out in Euston, you could say, but you want people to start doing that.
Absolutely right. And to think of it as a place that they work, not just a place you travel through. Actually, of course, there is a business community there, otherwise there wouldn't be a business improvement district. But you don't see it.
We talked about the changes made to Camden. What about the future of Camden? How can you keep its unique character, its fascinating character, and at the same time keep growing and...
I think, well, the great missed view of Camden Town is that it's actually a hub for the creative industries. There are far more people that come out of the tube and go to work in an office than there are pulling pints or selling T-shirts. What you see is the visitor economy, and it's great, but actually the dominant part of the economy, the dominant group of my membership, is this office-based creative industry stuff. So it's MTV, it's APTN, it's Ted Baker, it's ASOS, it's on and on and on. So how can we really bring that more to life so that people see and feel that? How can we help Londoners rediscover Camden Town? Because I think there is a bit of a loss there. And one of the key projects that I've mentioned is Camden Collective. It's finding spaces where we can help young micro startups get their first feet on the ladder. So when young people are looking at starting up creative industry type stuff in London, they think about Camden Town as a destination. And we have a very important rule in Camden Collective. I don't know whether you have to edit this out or not, but the first rule of Camden Collective is don't be an arse. And we write that into the agreement. And the reason we do that is because we want people who come and use the space to understand they're part of a community that we're trying to build and develop.
I wanted to talk to you just briefly, talk about the space for businesses. That was one of your key things. Obviously, the thing that every politician talks about will be a key thing in this election coming up is housing, the housing crisis. How can you reconcile the fact that we need space for businesses at the same time that we need space for houses, and of course offices are being turned into housing? How do you, as a leader of business improvement districts, reconcile the two?
Well, I don't feel that you actually have to compensate. You have to lose one in order to gain another. You know, the permitted development rights, as you're referring to, this switch from office to residential is doing terrible things to workspace in London. And all the mayoral candidates have got that. I think it's a very clearly understood problem. I think when you're trying to create communities, you need both. And to do one without the other creates sterile environments either way. You need places where you don't want to put too much of a burden on the transport infrastructure, so the more you can get people living near where they work, the more you can use high streets in a more complex way so that people think of them as places where they live as well as places where they work. It's all about that sense of what is a community and how do you bring all the parts of it together, not just identifying one particular bit. And yes, we need more housing, but to go with it, you need lots of things like transport, like retail, but you absolutely need workspace that goes with that as well.
So we've got a big job ahead, and you do too. Simon Pitkeathley, thank you so much for coming and talking to us today. Sadly, that's all we have time for on the headline interview. As always, you can check out our best ones on the website, and do join us again for more from the headline interview.